Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Long. I am a professor of international education here at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. On behalf of my co-host and colleague, Professor Bernhard Streitwieser, I want to welcome you to today's event, Spotlight on Innovative Higher Education Institutions in the Middle East and South Asia. We are delighted to be joined by our featured speakers, the chief executives of the aforementioned innovative institutions, Bruce Ferguson of the American University of Iraq, Sulaimani, and Nirmala Rao of the Asian University for Women. They will soon tell us about their institutions, their approaches to internationalization, and how those approaches have been affected by the pandemic. But first, I want to address a few housekeeping details and offer some context for today's event. After our guests provide opening remarks, we will proceed to a lightly moderated conversation before taking questions from the audience. Please submit your questions through the Q&A button. We will try to address as many as we can, but due to the large number of registrants, more than 150 from over 20 different countries, it's unlikely that we will be able to get to everyone, but don't let that deter you. Please send in your questions early and often. Now, why these two regions and why these two institutions? Our panelists themselves might even be asking that question. After all, Iraq and Bangladesh are clearly quite different. A particularly striking contrast is size. Bangladesh, the 8th most populous country in the world, has 4 times as many people and fits them into a space a third of the size of Iraq. Their economies too suggest an odd pairing, with Iraq's oil-based economy struggling and Bangladesh's more diversified one soaring. Even so, Iraq's GDP per capita is more than 3 times the size of Bangladesh's. The pandemic provides yet another dissimilarity, with cases surging in Iraq and subsiding in Bangladesh. But it is precisely because their environments are so different that makes what these institutions share all the more remarkable. Both are young institutions, under 2 decades old. Both have missions to develop leaders through liberal arts learning. Both have commitments to educating traditionally underrepresented communities. Both institutions are located in their country or region's second cities. Both are unmistakably international in their orientations. How is it that such similar reforms landed in such different places at roughly the same time? To answer that question, we might look to what Bangladesh and Iraq have in common. They are both parliamentary republics with overwhelmingly Muslim populations and severe refugee crises. On various indices, they have surprisingly similar levels of human development, inequality, and corruption. When we consider that Iraq and Bangladesh are both situated in the shadow of larger, more powerful countries with complicated geopolitical histories stemming from colonialism, some of these common outcomes become more comprehensible. Indeed, it's perhaps less surprising to note that both have British-inspired educational systems, but they also have more modern influences, including private higher education systems that educate at least a third of post-secondary students. When it comes to international education, neither country is much of an inbound destination, especially when compared to neighboring hubs in their broader regions. International branch campuses of major universities from Western countries attract students and media attention to the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, and to Hong Kong, South Korea, and Malaysia. Today, we turn the spotlight toward institutions that have internationalized in different ways, perhaps even in more consequential ways. Today's event is the second in a series of 3 seminars that explores how the COVID-19 pandemic is disrupting higher education. We're interested not only in distinguishing fads from long-term reforms, but in learning from people and places who are undertaking notable works that might otherwise be overlooked, at least from the perspective of North America. That is why we are considering these 2 regions, these 2 countries, and these 2 institutions. And that is why we are so very fortunate to have their leaders with us today. So let's see what they have to say. We'll hear from Bruce first and then Nirmala. Bruce, what can you tell us about the American University of Iraq, Sulaimani?
Well, thank you very much, Kyle, and thank you, Dr. Streitwieser, for the invitation to be here today. I'm a big fan of George Washington University. Before I got my academic degrees, I received a certificate from George Washington University. It was my birth certificate from the George Washington University Hospital in downtown District of Columbia. So I've had a very favorable impression of GW ever since. Another university I'm very fond of is the American University of Iraq in Sulaimani. I'm right now, as we speak, in the building that's to the right of the one you're looking at. It's just a little bit off camera. In the back, you can see mountains, some of which lead off to Iran. We're in a very interesting part of the world. As Kyle mentioned, we have large neighbors all around us, and we're located at this little diamond symbol here in the Sulaimani city in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Iran is just to our east, about 100 kilometers off. Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Kuwait are all neighbors. We're at a crossroads, and one of the things we try to instill in our students is a sense that they need to build bridges, both to other countries and within their own country, whether it's from city to city or from religion to religion or ethnicity to ethnicity. I think Sulaimani is a very pretty city. This is not a view you see in much of Iraq, these mountains and rolling hills. And this is certainly not a scene that you encounter very often in Iraq. This is a winter day on our campus a couple of years ago. So we too know what cold is like, and we sympathize with those of you in the US right now who are struggling through a really difficult winter. Our mission here is similar to that of many liberal arts universities around the world. We're trying to develop the human capital necessary for a healthy, vigorous society. And we're trying at the individual level to instill what are called critical thinking skills, which I call analysis based on facts, as well as a tolerance for beliefs and conclusions that are different than yours, and a sense of community. All of these are crucial in Iraq and are desperately needed at the university level. And as a not-for-profit university, we stand out. We're the first not-for-profit in Iraq. We don't have owners or investors. We see ourselves as operating in the public interest. A third of our faculty come from the United States, another third from 16 other countries, and another third from Iraq and the Kurdistan region, a very diverse faculty, unlike any other in the university sphere in Iraq. 2/3 of our faculty have US academic degrees, all speak and write English at a professional level, and we have a really excellent academic administrative staff to manage this wonderful group. Our students also are more diverse than any in the Kurdistan region, with roughly 16 to 18% from outside the region. So we clearly are a Kurdish university, but we pride ourselves in the fact that we have students from all 19 provinces in Iraq, including as well students from Syria, many of them refugees, Yazidis who suffered so much under ISIS. Almost 40% of our students are female, and roughly 20% were in dormitories before the pandemic, although that number has gone down considerably, as I'll mention. We have 90% of our students supported by subsidies that come from the United States government and are gratefully recognized by me tonight, as well as by private donors and other grant agencies. We've been very fortunate connecting to outside sources of funding. Our students have to speak and write English at the undergraduate level before they can start because their courses are all in English. And we offer a core curriculum in addition to their major courses, which again is very comparable, very similar and familiar to those of you with liberal arts backgrounds. We have 1,300 alumni across 9 graduating classes to date. Our alumni are known for getting good jobs, many in the private sector, which is unusual in Iraq, and therefore they often make more than their counterparts from other universities. We have 6 academic programs offering 11 degrees. Our most popular degrees are business, engineering, medical laboratory sciences, information technology. But we also offer English, social sciences that round out many of the liberal arts disciplines that we'd like to expand. And we've just introduced a new undergraduate law program, which is the standard here, rather than teaching as a graduate subject. We have a number of university partnerships and accreditation in the Kurdistan region and in Iraq, the first to get dual accreditation. We believe that extracurricular learning is an essential part of education. We focus on that. It's part of what makes us distinct in the region. Our IT support is outstanding and was vital to our ability to move to online courses after our campus was closed down. We did this within 96 hours of the sudden announcement that our campus would be closed. And it would not have been possible without the experienced faculty we had and the wonderful IT support. Our research activities also have largely moved online or remotely. This International Institute, IRIS, which sponsors the Sulaimani Forum every year, which brings together leaders from the region and outside the country to discuss how to make the political solutions in Iraq possible. IRIS has been very successful in moving to a webinar-based format for many of its activities. Similarly, our Gender Center, which now has actions and activities in 6 different countries in the region, has moved largely online, although it still has in-person seminars. It's working on translating materials to Arabic from English and vice versa, providing more facilities and equipment and materials for gender centers and other places. We have a culture center and an archaeology center. The archaeology center is focused on preserving the amazing heritage of the country and region. Our entrepreneurship center has sponsored students like these in the HULT Business Prize competition, where we've been very successful. We've also started a new business accelerator, which graduated its first class of 12 startup founders. This also is funded by outside grants, which we've been successful in bringing to the region. And we're strongly supportive of entrepreneurship and innovation in Iraq. We also have a nascent environmental studies group supported in part by Ford Motor Company and National Geographic, and hope to expand that over the coming years. Finally, we've just started the AUIS Press, which has published its first 2 books, one on the local bird life and one on local wildflowers. We did this in collaboration with our research partner, the Kurdistan Botanical Foundation. So that's who we are. Let me turn now briefly to how we might be regarded as an international university. And I'll defer to our hosts on true definitions, but I put together some indices that help me defend my argument that we are truly international. I looked first at how many faculty we have from other countries. 68% is a pretty high number. Faculty who studied abroad is even higher than that. Many of our Kurdish and Iraqi faculty have degrees from the US, the UK, France, and other countries. Students from abroad, still lower than we'd like. It's probably on the order of 2 to 4% today. Students who've studied abroad, still very low. This number is often higher for US universities, as is the prior index. But we'll try to work on this over time. It's expensive and not affordable for many of our current students, but it is useful in trying to develop an international flavor at a university. I am proud that all of our students are bilingual. That's an astonishing thing. It turns out that almost 100% of our faculty also are bilingual. I think that's an amazing window to the world to open, both for faculty and students. We have teaching collaborations with many international, that is foreign institutions, and are rapidly developing new such relationships. TIEC at the bottom there is the Texas International Education Consortium, which is comprised of several dozen Texas universities and has been a wonderful partner in developing curriculum at our university. We have research collaborations with 2 UK-based universities and hope to develop new research collaborations. These are typically funded by government grants from outside Iraq and the Kurdistan region. We have a non-native language of instruction. That's a hard test for many universities in the States to pass, and it could be argued that it's not really essential to having an international character, but when you have it, I think you should count it. It's a pretty powerful indicator that you're different than others in the country. We also have a foreign curriculum and foreign teaching techniques. Again, since in the US, we often regard teaching techniques and the curriculum as world standard. So it's hard for US universities to do well on these indices. But again, if you can show this, it's a pretty powerful indicator that you're different from what's going on in the rest of the country. We've applied for US accreditation, regional accreditation. It's hard to get when there's a travel advisory in your country. We'll keep plugging away. It's a good discipline. We try to run our university as though it was accredited. Eventually, hopefully the name will catch up with the facts. We have programmatic accreditation of our English for Second Language program, and we'll apply for other programmatic accreditations. We have a state-of-art teaching and learning set of capabilities. They're not, I'd say, at the absolute cutting edge, but things like Zoom, really excellent laboratory equipment, our student information system are very much state-of-the-art. So I'd give us full marks for this. We have a nearby international airport, which helps in connecting with the rest of the world, and a nearby international border, which we don't take advantage of, times being what they are, but keeps us aware that we're not alone in the world. And I think when you have it, it should be counted. Now, when you add up all of these indices and weight them equally and score them as you would the consumer reports methodology, we get a score of 70%. So we're 70% on this international master index. I did the same thing for Harvard. And because of some of the things like having a non-native curriculum, et cetera, they actually only scored 57%. So they're not quite as international as AUIS, but it probably doesn't trouble them too much. I would say that either indicates this set of indices is completely wrong, or that it measures something different than normal rankings might measure. And I would probably tend towards the latter. So thank you very much. That's AUIS, and I turn it back to Kyle.
Thank you, Bruce, for sharing. I appreciate that. I think we would like to turn to Nirmala now to provide some remarks about Asian University for Women, but it looks like we might have lost her. While we wait for her to return, let's take advantage of having Bruce here and get to interrogate him a little bit about AUIS and I'd like to dig into the pandemic a little bit more and learn a little bit more about how the pandemic has affected sort of operations on campus and sort of what, if any, sort of changes you're expecting to outlast the pandemic, things you might have had to pivot toward that may end up becoming long-term solutions.
I think the answer you'll probably hear from a lot of universities is the balance between online education and on-campus education is likely to shift, and that is likely to be a permanent shift. We firmly believe in the value of the campus for many types of learning. We're biological organisms. We are conditioned to learn in certain ways that have nothing to do with laptops or print. We learn from each other in a very deep way. And without that sort of learning, I think a lot of education is incomplete. So particularly extracurricular types of education, peer-based education are on campus, but the cost advantages, the scaling capabilities, the penetration to areas that where students otherwise cannot be reached are unparalleled advantages of online education. And we need to take advantage of those to adapt to the times. Other changes, yeah, I think probably people will be wearing masks for a long time.
Yeah, your remarks about quality and cost, how often there were concerns about achieving quality through online education that I think we're sort of changing our thinking about, especially as faculty become more adept and students at leveraging these tools. Hi, Nirmala, welcome back.
I'm so sorry. I don't know how for a moment, I felt I'm in Bangladesh. This is what happens. And I'm really sorry. It just got...
Not a problem. You weren't gone long, and we've enjoyed chatting with Bruce.
I'm very sorry. I missed the last bit of your, but
not a concern. Don't worry. Let me just pose this last question, and then we'll turn it over to you, Nirmala, for your presentation. But Bruce was just telling us that he'd noticed some changes to both quality and cost as a result of the pandemic. What about access? Are you anticipating that the pivot to online learning, or at least the potential for, to use the language of markets, opening up new avenues towards students you might not have reached before? Do you think that this will have much impact on long-term access, or is this sort of a short-term solution?
I think it should have an impact on access, both for cost reasons and convenience reasons. Sometimes it's very difficult for students, adult learners, for example, to commute to a college campus to learn. Being able to learn online presents some advantages. And I think that even in our case, students have difficulty getting to our campus from remote parts of the region or country. During the pandemic, many of our students resisted vociferously the idea that they should continue their education online. They insisted it was lower quality, and in many ways they're correct. But now it's hard to pull them back. I think they're used to being able to study asynchronously, which is a tremendous advantage of online education. That's a virtue that I think is going to persist.
That makes sense. And I hope that we can return to this sort of line of questioning after we hear from Nirmala about Asian University for Women, about which we're very eager to learn. And so I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Kyle. And let me put my... It's creating the same. Oh.
I would say, though, that online education does have some disadvantages as well. We often have power shortages here, so many of our students cannot log on. And we had to invest in technology for students who are in remote areas with poor access to internet or spotty power grids.
Kyle, you're able to see the screen?
We are, please.
At least something is working. I'm so sorry again.
It's not a problem.
I was about to say I don't have the privilege of Bruce's birth certificate from Washington, nor do I have the glamorous campus that he's shown us lovely pictures of both the city and the campus, because we are located in a very, very small temporary campus, which hardly has any space, but we have about 8 buildings. The only thing I can say is we're very proud that we've graduated about 1,000 students in that little space and highly diverse. And I'll tell you a bit about them, but we also have 140 acres of land, which we got from the government. That's the only connection with the government. And we are now embarking on the construction, having just secured about 30 million from the World Bank to kickstart the construction. So once the full campus, which is designed by Moshe Safdie, who is based in Harvard, once that comes through, I think it will be a transformative experience. But a lot of what Bruce had just said about the liberal arts side of things, we share a lot in common. And I won't rehearse all the issues he's already raised, but very happy to take questions. Now, the university was set up in 2008, and it's still the only all-female liberal arts institution in the region, not just in Bangladesh, but in the region. And it was set up with a very specific purpose to attract women with potential from diverse backgrounds, from bypassed communities who would never have dreamt of coming to university to study. And the idea is, over a period of time, it will create an international network of women leaders in the region. The distinctiveness lies not just in the fact that it's an all-female liberal arts, but also the way in which the university was set up in its charter, where the diversity was embedded. In the charter, it was clearly stated that there'll be only 40% students from Bangladesh. And that actually opened up diversity, which is a very nice way to achieve diversity, I think. And it's something that never occurred to me, having spent 30 years in the UK, a very different Western experience. And so the charter allowed that. And what the charter also gave us was complete autonomy from the government, which is very important. As Kyle had beautifully set up the context for Bangladesh, there are problems of corruption, there are endemic problems, and it's in a region fraught with geopolitical intricacies. So given the situation, I think the best thing that happened to the university was complete independence from the government. The only link with the government is we have the ex officio foreign minister and education minister and secretaries as the members of the board of trustees. There is one interesting feature of this university, which I personally, as head of institution, would say something that in the West may not be possible, but it's possible in India and Bangladesh, is the sitting education minister chairs a board. Which may, I don't know how it is in the US, but in the UK it would be difficult, but she's absolutely a fantastic chair. She's a doctor by background, and has also a law degree, I think, from the University of London. So we are distinctive in terms of the students we have, in terms of the curriculum, in terms of the independence from the government. Oh.
Nirmala, quickly,
Yeah.
perfect. I've got you the presentation now, full screen.
Is that, sorry, it wasn't a...
Perfect now.
In terms of the students, we have students from 19 different countries from Asia and the Middle East. And they come from very marginalized communities, including the garment factories. And I'll come to that in a minute. Daughters of microfinance borrowers, the refugees from Myanmar, from the Rohingyas, from Cox's Bazar, from Syria, Palestine, Yemen, and students from Afghanistan are about 10% of our total population. We also have started recruiting from the northeast part of Myanmar, where the Kachin, Shan, and very deprived communities, and the hill tribes of Nagaland. As I said, we have about currently enrolled 1,000 students, and we also have graduated 1,000 students, and they're spread out from all these countries. And we've added recently Senegal to our list of countries. And beyond Afghanistan, the third largest cohort are from the Rohingya camps. So the Rohingya, and it's the first time the universities actually opened doors to the refugee population. We are also international in the sense that 60% of our faculty is international. We have a diverse group of faculty representing 14 countries now. We've added recently another, coming from Italy, Ireland, United States, India, a lot from the UK, but majority from from the United States. We are also being accredited by NECI, the national, the commission which for higher education that accredits the liberal arts colleges in the US, including, of course, the Stanfords and Harvard. We are in the third year of our accreditation, just having graduated from the eligibility criteria. We are in the candidacy stage. I think it's a long drawn out process of about 9 years. We are not even halfway there. But that's our faculty portfolio. The third distinctive feature of the university is its liberal arts education. As I said, we have a core general education. All of you are familiar with liberal arts. Those in the UK are not as familiar. Liberal arts was introduced only about 7 or 8 years ago, but it's much more, of course, common in the US and other parts of the world. We have 5 majors in bioinformatics, environmental science, public health. Economics and public health have the largest group of students, followed by politics, philosophy, and economics. But more and more, we are seeing a lot of students opting for the sciences in the last couple of years. We have a bunch of minors from biological sciences to finance and gender studies and public health. So that's the undergraduate degree. But because we take students from very diverse marginalized communities, and the garment factory that I alluded to was in 2016, first intake, we thought there are about 4,000 women workers in Bangladesh factories. And we thought there must be a group of highly talented young women who would want to come to university and study. So we went to the factories and we asked the factory owners if we could conduct a test on a Friday afternoon. And if the students qualified, we would take them for 5 years on the condition that they would pay the salaries to the families. Otherwise, they were not going to release their daughters to study. And 7 factories signed up, including Nike and Adidas. And they signed up, and we recruited about 40 students in the first intake. And they came alongside the first recruitment from the Rohingya camps. When I say from the camps, they're actually not from within the camps, but just around the camps. Settlements that came in 1975 and 1994. Those were the 2 big waves of refugees from Myanmar into Bangladesh. So over a period of time, they've acquired some kind of identity, and we are able to recruit from them. So 2016 was a watershed for the university when we recruited these two groups of students. Now, recruiting from these communities, it's not easy, politically difficult, but also these girls have had no exposure to English whatsoever. So we had to put a new program called the pre-access. We already had a one-year access program running quite successfully. But because they had not even the basics of English and maths, we had to put a pre-access program, which was called the Pathways for Promise. So although they were targeted for these two communities, over a period of time, we found students coming from Syria and Palestine, Yemen, and even Afghanistan students. Actually, we could admit more into this program, which focused just on English and maths, followed by one more year of Access Academy, which built on their English communication skills and critical thinking, problem solving, and introduced them to a range of other subjects, integrated science, which we introduced, so that you open up science subjects even before they start the undergraduate to see if that is a good pathway for recruiting more students into science programs, because increasingly we were saying they were getting into economics or PPE and very low uptake of sciences. So Access Academy works well. We have about 85% of our students progressing quite successfully every year from pathways to access. And we have around, by the time they come to access, about 90-95% successfully move on to undergraduate degrees. So they stay with us on an average 4 to 5 years. Those coming into pathways spend 5 years with us, and those coming in at the point of entry to access spend 4 years with us. What I didn't tell you is the whole university was entirely driven by donations and scholarships. So each scholarship is about $15,000. So a large part of my time is spent on fundraising, but I'm helped. In fact, the 80% of fundraising is done by our foundation in Boston, which is a support foundation. And our founder, Mr. Kamal Ahmed, who founded the university along with Jack Mayer. Jack Mayer used to chair the Harvard Endowment Fund. They set up the university and they run the foundation from with a group of trustees from Boston. But we also have a network of international support foundations in Tokyo and Singapore and London and in Europe and New York. So it's an interesting model that this network was imperative in order to raise 8 to 9 million every year just for scholarships. So when I arrived in 2017, I took stock of the fact that, as you know, there were about 96% of students on full scholarship, and we had very little fee income coming in. So we introduced tuition fees, and today we are able to raise about 1.8 million out of the turnover of 7 to 8 million in the form of fees. And the idea is, as we expand with the new campus, as we grow to 3,000 and 5,000, 50% of the students will actually pay fees, which will cover for the remainder of the 50%. And we become a lot more sustainable. But for that to happen, of course, we need the estates, we need the infrastructure. But at the moment, we are doing quite well in attracting fees to sustain ourselves, plus the donations, of course, that Mr. Kamal Ahmed and all our network of supporters are able to generate. Our pride and joy, of course, are the graduates. As I said, there were over 1,000 graduates employed in a range of organizations, predominantly in the nonprofit sector, research institutions. They're also in government departments, and many go to graduate school. At any point in time, for example, this year there are 12 in Oxford, there are 3 in Cambridge, and there are about, this year, 22 got admission to University of Sussex, University of London, they're in Johns Hopkins. We've had a couple of, we had 2 PhDs emerge out of Stanford who joined the university in 2013. And we have a number of PhDs from Seoul and Europe and different parts of the world. And I think that gives us a lot of, it's very rewarding to see the students coming from these backgrounds and investing every minute of their life, into learning and doing well. And there's a fantastic desire to learn, and because it's a residential, and all the teachers and all of us live in proximity to the dorms. It's a 24-hour service, if you like, and during examinations, they have very easy access to their teachers, and they're doing really well, both in the university and when they leave. Of course, I gave you the background because the impact of COVID, we've had certain implications because the kind of population that we have, which other universities in Bangladesh, for example, or anywhere in the region will not have experienced. We were asked to shut down within 4 days of notice, and our problem compared with others was different in that we had about 700 out of 1,000 students who were from abroad. So our first task was to try and see how we're going to repatriate these students back to their 19 countries, which was a huge challenge. The financial implications, of course, was yet another factor, because we have to pick up the costs for all these students. Just to transport 124 students back to Afghanistan cost us nearly 300,000, because it was a chartered flight. Everywhere we had to charter flights to send the students. Borders had shut. We had problems. We have a lot of problems with forced migration. We have refugees who were not able to go back to the camps. So we've had to continue to keep them on campus for a long time. And as of now, we still have a group of 30 to 35 from the Myanmar Rohingya refugees still with us. And we have to, because students, it took about 6 months to try and send students back to Yemen and places like Syria. It took us a long time, but we managed to get them back to their home countries. Now, the problem with these countries, of course, is particularly Afghanistan, in places like Hazara and some of the northern Afghanistan remote areas, there's absolutely no internet connection. And the same holds true for many of the regions of Bangladesh, where internet connection is either virtually absent or very poor. In 2019-20, only about 13% of households had internet connection. And it improved slightly after May 2020, but a lot of our students come from the hilly areas and very remote villages where there's absolutely no connection. So that was a huge challenge for us, to send them study packs, or where there was some kind of connection, to give them data packs to enhance their connectivity. We had to also give them the finances for Afghanistan students, particularly, to both to survive as well as to get some kind of internet facility. Where there was none, we had to create centers, community centers, for them to come and stay in capital cities of Kabul, or in Myanmar, in Yangon, or in Cambodia, Phnom Penh. We had to create openings for them, settle them, so that they could actually have access and continue to study. Of course, a lot of students use phones, but we had to also substitute with laptops. Not just individualized help, but we also had to cope with the additional investment we had to make in the IT infrastructure, enhancing our platforms and our service. So while that was a nice opportunity for us to modernize some of our infrastructure, it came at a very high cost. The challenges, of course, are we are important in the country in terms of our contribution. All universities are. We contribute to the local economy. We help in capacity building. But for AUW, we are already international, but even other universities, we all have to be asking ourselves, how do we cope with this online learning? We still have 40% of our faculty locally recruited. The advantage we have, of course, is a very young faculty who are agile, could adapt very easily and learn the game and and adapt to online learning. And there are challenges going forward when the university will open in September as to how we're going to manage, because a lot of students will be coming from different countries where vaccinations have not yet started. And unlike other universities, we don't have the capacity to have a blended learning because faculty are also spread out as well as the students. So blended learning is possible if you have a core faculty on site who can actually deliver programs on the ground, which can be available for online. So these are just, I'm sorry, I just gave you a quick detour of problems in the context of who we are and where we are located, but very happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nirmala. I mean, this is great to learn about what's happening on campus and what the impact of the pandemic has been. You talked a little, I mean, there's so much to grab onto here, but one of the things that I was struck by was your account of sort of international donor networks. And, you know, as a president, spending a lot of time fundraising. And I know that Bruce also cited a number of international partnerships that his institution has developed. I'm curious what the impact of the pandemic has been on your ability to establish and sustain either international academic partnerships or international donor networks. Has it made it harder or easier?
It's not been easy. Yeah, it's not been easy, I have to say. In many cases, actually, some of the donors, their pledges were withdrawn, which made it even more difficult. That's one end of the spectrum. I wouldn't say very many of them, but some of them had to hold back, or they've taken back their pledges. But otherwise, in some parts of the world, Japan, for example, our support foundation has done extremely well. They raised as well as they could at any other time. It also depends on the local culture. And there's a culture of giving in Japan, which is quite unparalleled in other parts of Asia. North America, we've continued, the Boston office has continued to attract, but not at the same rate as they would have in the previous year. So it's definitely had an impact. We've not raised any locally from Bangladesh. It's difficult in the best of times, but it's been even more difficult. In terms of partnerships, I've not shared our partnership, but we do have progression agreements with the University of Sussex and Cambridge, and as I said, Johns Hopkins and some other universities, and they've continued to support us, and that's not changed. Except that where there are internships and work placements in companies, it had to be virtual, and there was no on-site internships.
Bruce, from your perspective, harder or easier to develop or sustain these kinds of either partnerships or donor networks? Muted, Bruce.
Yes, it's harder to form new partnerships, but I say that after the first 6 months or so, everyone is now adapted. And so it's now pretty normal in terms of number of interactions and what we discuss. It's all virtual. It's all remote. One interesting effect has been we don't have face-to-face receptions anymore to educate people about what we're doing. We have Zoom-based receptions, and we send out a little baklava and a little information ahead of time so people feel that they're actually at a reception. And it's fun. You know, it's nice to adapt in that way.
I'm seeing a couple of questions come in for both of you related to conflict. There's a question about how Iraq, which is still suffering from insecure security situation, deals with sort of the prospect, if not outright experience of military conflict in the surrounding area, what that sort of means on campus. and for Nirmala as well, with students from Afghanistan and elsewhere, how do you, what is your perspective on perhaps keeping students on campus so as not to, force return to hazardous or unstable political situations? So Bruce, I'll start with you.
Okay. Well, Iraq is fairly well known for having conflicts now and then. We were very close to ISIS when it was invading, moving towards Erbil in the Kurdistan region. At one point, they were just 100 miles off as the crow flies, but most of our faculty stayed with us. We've had our airport shut while I was here because of political unrest. Protests in the south have caused concerns. I will say, though, the Kurdistan region is a special part of Iraq. There's a very strong identity here, and the result has been that most terrorist incidents or very high visibility incidents have been outside the region. There are exceptions. There was a bombing in Erbil just a couple of days ago, but by and large, I think we feel safer here than we would in many other parts of the world. And that's because of the regional security as opposed to university security. And that's much preferable. The perimeter of security is really the Kurdistan region's boundary rather than the university's fence. And that's the way we like it.
I think for us, Kyle, 3 countries posed a particular dilemma, and that was Afghanistan, Syria, and Palestine, and Yemen, not Palestine, Yemen. And we were contemplating whether to keep the students, on campus without sending them home. But the situation locally had got to a point where we could really not contemplate keeping anybody. In fact, we had to just shut down the campus, and we had no choice because Chittagong in Bangladesh is the second largest city next to Dhaka, but still the hospital infrastructure is very, very poor. The ITUs were absolutely full up, and the doctors were refusing to treat COVID patients. And because we don't have a campus, there was no question of social distancing. Everybody, about 800, 900 students in a very small space, we just couldn't manage, and we had no choice but to send them back. Of course, students have settled back in their countries, but we are now facing demands from students, particularly from Kabul, wanting to come back because of the conflicts there and the situation there. They want to come back. We are considering a staged return before September, but we've not worked out how we're going to do that because the situation in Bangladesh has not really improved. And I feel a bit hesitant before the vaccination programs are at least underway in Bangladesh to bring, it's not just the host country, but also students coming from all these different countries. You just need one of them with infection for the whole place to explode. So that is a dilemma. But I think you're right. Bangladesh is safer than any of these other countries. But there are other issues we have to consider in bringing students back.
Sure. As we get closer to the end of our time together, I think one of the sort of last, maybe not last, but one of the near to last questions that has come in from one of our attendees that I think might appeal to the educational philosophers in you is that much of the attention on COVID-inspired changes to university learning has been on the form, and that we're focusing a lot on the modality of delivering education. Less attention has been paid on how the change in form might change the content. Do you have any expectation that the substance or content of curricula may change as a consequence of a perhaps longer term shift toward changes in delivery?
I would certainly expect that to happen, Kyle. The medium and the message are very hard to extricate one from the other. And there are certain advantages to being online. You can have pop-ups, you can do research in real time. It's pretty interesting what you can do with modern technology. And I hope that we take full advantage of that and don't just limit ourselves to classroom type lectures online. That would be a terrible waste of a new resource.
I echo what Bruce has just said. The content has not changed as yet, but I can see that will have to change as we go along for longer on online. I mean, initially we struggled with a lot of science components not having labs, but now we managed to get a Labster, which gives virtual labs, and students are quite content with using those. So we've had to progress, but yes, I mean, the mode of assessment has had to change, definitely, in many respects. But I'm sure even the content will have to be tweaked if we carry on online.
A related question is about the provision of training to faculty and administrators. Has a lot of what you've been doing just been, learning while doing, or are you focused on providing some, resources for your teams to be more effective at this this new modality?
One of the advantages of diversity is a wide range of capabilities and skills. It turned out we had faculty on campus who had taught online and were familiar with the technology. We instantly engaged them in the process of training our faculty, which is how we were able to move online within 4 days. Without that, it would have been extremely difficult. And we have invested a lot in training faculty since then.
We've done the same. We use the senior faculty with a lot more experience in online delivery to actually train the junior faculty, and they adapted pretty well. They got on, and we never thought at any point that they'll be loading the lectures on YouTube and other media, but they've done it with a lot of agility, and they've not asked for any external resources because there's a lot of skills, just as Bruce has said. They complement each other extremely well, and there's a lot of shared learning. And even for students, I mean, students, I think it's not surprising, but they adapted to this much faster and quicker and with a lot more resilience than the faculty, I would say. It's, and particularly heartening to see some of these girls coming from extremely disadvantaged communities to have risen to that challenge. So.
Well, I think that brings us near to the end of our time. I want to thank both of you for joining us and sharing so much with us, both your time and your insights. Dr. Streitwieser, any final remarks from you?
Yeah, thank you both very much, President Ferguson and Vice Chancellor Rao. One question that I did want to still put to you, and that relates to the third seminar we're going to be having in April, is what advice do you have for other campus leaders who want to leverage internationalization to strengthen their institutions? That is another way to phrase the question, perhaps, is if you were to start from scratch again, would you design anything differently than you did?
I think I'd raise 2 points. One was touched on by Dr. Nirmala, who pointed out that they try to maintain a certain independence from the government. And I think if you're trying to do things very differently in a country, that independence is vital. And I would probably have invested more in strengthening that early on. The second thing is independence is also conferred by financial reserves. So I think spending as much time on creating an endowment as on capital assets would have been a nice decision.
Thank you, Dr. Rao.
I would say the same. I mean, we need definitely greater investment both in infrastructure, software, hardware, training, I mean, learning the lessons of the pandemic are not going to be easy for everyone, and some have had to go through greater pain than others. But I think overall institutions have had little choice but to navigate through these times of difficult, profound change. I think if the past year has shown anything, it's shown us one thing, that higher education can adapt, can change, because the public perception is we are just too stuck, and the pace of change is very slow. I think that's true of all higher education universities. But I think the pandemic has shown how agile we can be, how innovative we can be, and how we've done, I think, all over the world, higher education has done extremely well. And there are a lot of things for us to share with one another. The only important thing to bear in mind is we shouldn't see this as a temporary, and rather build on it to see if there are in our strategies scope for distance learning, for example. I'm sure your universities have a great deal of that already, but in Bangladesh, we still are lagging far behind. There's nothing called distance learning. We have very little of it. I'm comparing my experience with the UK, where we have a huge distance learning program just at University of London. And I'm hoping that going forward, in countries where we are still stragglers there, that we'll capitalize and learn from this and invest in distance learning, because it's a fantastic way of reaching areas where we would otherwise not. It exposes students to different cultures and a much wider network of peers and scholars, and we should build on it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rao, and thank you, Dr. Ferguson. So before I thank our esteemed speakers today and call your attention to our third and last seminar coming up, I just want to say that from my own research, which looks at access for refugees to higher education, the big theme that often comes out is that enlightened thinking with a generosity of spirit can really make the difference that's needed. It's so sort of that complicated and that simple, that you have an idea and you get the resources to try to make it happen, and you can make a difference. That is an openness to recognizing the value in people who simply want to do something in simplest terms to make the world a better place. And I think these two institutions we've heard from today really exemplify that in spectacularly successful ways. In the face of significant adversity, think of security mentioned in both settings, really, is just one of those types of adversity examples. And they've been so successful in terms of access to chronically underserved groups, particularly women. They've been very successful securing funding. That's what I refer to as this enlightened thinking supplanted with a generosity of spirit. They've managed to tap into that in important ways that have served their institutions, even during the pandemic, as was one of the questions posed. And this has led to obvious demonstrated marks of achievement in its graduates, and in the end, sending them on to future promise, and particularly for women graduates or those from underserved areas of Iraq that might not have had opportunities, or or Asia that might have not have had opportunities otherwise. I think that's just an incredible achievement and something really hopeful, hope-inspiring for the future. So with those words, I want to thank again University Vice Chancellor Nirmala Rao and University President Bruce Ferguson for their time and expertise shared with us today. I want to thank our broad audience from so many different countries and institutions that have joined us today. And I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Long, for leading on this really important meeting that we've had a chance to be part of today. And with that, let me invite you all to our third and last George Washington University seminar on the theme of reimagining higher education worldwide after COVID-19, which will be held on April 14th at 12 p.m. US Eastern Standard Time. And the topic will be establishing the American University of Sicily as a laboratory for innovation. And in that session, we will feature one of the guests on our call today, Dr. Sami Basha, the president of that institution, and again, also have a number of distinguished guest panelists for what promises to be the third and unfortunately last of our very robust discussions. So thank you from the depths of my heart for that conversation we've been able to have, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Long to say goodbye.
You knew this would be an academic seminar because we went 6 minutes over time, but nothing further from me. That concludes our event today. Thanks everyone for attending, and thanks to our remarkable guests for their incredible insights.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kyle and Bernhard.
Thank you.
Appreciate the invitation.
Thank you,
Hello,
Professor
everyone.
Streitwieser, and thank you, Kyle. Thank you so much. And sorry once again for the hiccup.
No
This
worries.
happens.
So much.
We're all used to this now. Yeah.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe. Stay
Thank
healthy and safe, everyone.
Very well.